The London system became extremely popular nowadays thanks to its simplicity. Today we're going to talk about the missing part, how to play the middle game. Once you've set up your pyramid of pawns, developed your pieces, what are you going to do next? That's one of the most common questions that people ask me, and let me address it today. I'm GM Igor Smirnov, and let's go ahead and get started. The London system comes out of the queen's pawn move pawn to d4, and after black replies whatever, white builds their famous pyramid of pawns. Black may again choose to play a different move order, but black will usually do something like this, and as soon as black goes c5, white solidifies their pawn chain by going c3, then white develops, and if black tries to attack this bishop on f4, there are different ways to go about this. One of the easiest ways is to just drop it back to g3, so that if black recaptures, you're always ready to recapture by your h-pawn, opening up your rook. Now black will castle, and then you go knight to d2. So that's the most classical, most popular position of the London system. But of course, like really interesting things are going to happen right after that, because you need to understand how to play it. What's the right plan for white, for black, what are different options? And we're going to talk about all the major options here so that you know it clearly and much better than the vast majority of your opponents. Black has a bunch of options to choose from. They can take on g3, they can try to prepare the central push e5, they can ignore everything and just develop with b6 and bishop b7, they can try to do something about the central pressure, whether to push forward or to trade on d4. As you can see, there's a huge number of options, but you'll notice that plans of white are always remain to be more or less the same. Anyway, let's tackle them one by one. Let's start by perhaps one of the most natural ways for black is just to trade off bishops. There's a lot of amateur players, if there is an opportunity to trade off something, they do it, because that simplifies the position and makes it easier to think. So let's say black trades here, and after pawn recaptures, notice that our rook is now active along the h-file. And you can also notice one little detail here. White actually delayed his casting a little bit, and he developed the queenside knife first instead of casting earlier. And now you can see why. Because if black actually trades on g3, now our pieces start to team up against this pawn on h7. Although, that's still not the end of the world for black. First of all, this pawn is already defended, and secondly, black can just push it forward, and it looks like there is no way for white to attack black anyway, but the way exists. So first off, you start by going knight to e5, and that's one of the trademark ways for white to begin your attack in the London system across all kinds of scenarios. So knight e5 is the way to go. That brings the knight out to a more active square. That also opens up this diagonal for your queen. And if black trades on e5, which they usually do, because otherwise they have to bear with this tension of this knight all around, so they usually capture. As you recapture, now you also drive away the last defender of the black king. So this knight has to go. Notice that we control this square twice, therefore black's knight can jump there. We're going to trade off and win a pawn, which means that the knight has to go back to d7. Black may feel optimistic about this for a second, because they might hope that you are going to blunder this pawn on e5. But of course, you won't. Instead, you're going to use the advantage that you have now by having this diagonal open, thanks to not having your knight on f3, and you can bring the queen out to h5, which already makes it quite annoying for black, because even though you don't have any checkmating threats right now, overall this concentration of forces against the black king feels unpleasant. And at some point, perhaps you're going to push g4, g5, and try to open up this file and checkmate black there. Therefore, black usually tries to do something about this. And the common way for black is trying to go pawn to f5. And that blocks the diagonal for your bishop, and black is trying to keep the position locked. But there is a really great way for you to attack here. Actually, we could take en passant, and that's one of the decent options for white to play here, because that would reopen this diagonal for our bishop, and if black recaptures, we can go inside with queen g6 and try to somehow capitalize on this diagonal, even though right now black is covering it, so it's not that dangerous for black, but nevertheless it's one of the options. But it's not the best one, because if I take this back, you can see that this pawn on e5 actually gives white space advantage, and it makes it harder for black to bring the knight back or to try to bring the queen to the defense. Therefore, we don't want to get rid of this pawn that easily. But we need to defend it. You do this by going pawn to f4. And what it does is that locks the position in the center of the board, providing your space advantage on the king side, and now it's really difficult for black to stop your attack, which is about to come. So let's say black does whatever, doesn't really matter. Let's say they do something on the queen side, they try to counterattack there. Now you break through with g4. And now you threaten either to take or to push, and in both cases, it's pretty bad for black. And if they recapture, we could take this pawn. That would be a perfectly great move for white to play, but in this scenario, it's even stronger to just go directly for the kill, right? So we've got a battery on this file, so queen to h7 is a big threat. Besides that, we're threatening rook takes h6. Notice that the pawn is pinned by the queen, therefore if we take over here, black can't recapture. In addition to that, this pawn on e6 is hanging, and as you can see, like the amount of threats that white has here is just overwhelming, and that's easily winning for white. That covers the move bishop takes g3, and as we have analyzed, we can see that after that white opens up the h-file, and it can get dangerous for black pretty soon if you know how to develop your attack, which by now you know. Alright, let's move on to the next option of black. The next idea that black may try is to somehow prepare this move pawn to e5, because if they can play this move without losing material, then, they achieve a lot. They start attacking you, putting pressure to the center, threatening e4. This would also open up this bishop to come out to a more active square, and overall that would be really great for black if they could do this. Right now they can't, because we've got 3 defenders of this square versus only 2 attackers. Therefore, if black plays here, that would be just a blunder. We take, and on the next move we're going to grab another piece. So black can't do this immediately, they have to prepare it. Now, how do they prepare it? Usually with either rook e8 or queen e7, trying to provide one more supporter for this further advancement of pawn to e5. And as soon as you see that your opponent is ready to push this pawn forward, almost exclusively, like in the London system, you always want to stop this by going knight to e5. So that's really the only move that you will play in the vast majority of the cases here. Because if black plays this move successfully, he's pretty good after that, and black is at least equalized and he's got no problems. So if you play knight to e5 now, then you achieve a lot of good stuff once again. So as we have known from the previous examples, like that actually marks the beginning of your attack quite frequently. But in addition to that, you still keep the position locked. Black can't push this pawn forward, therefore all these pieces that stand behind the pawn are kind of stuck there, can't get out. If black ever tries to provide more pressure, not like this, that would be a mouse slip and you would grab it. So, but like this, then you overprotect this knight with pawn to f4. And as soon as you reach this position, it's time for a little party and celebration, because quite often that actually means that you are very close to winning the game, even though your opponent does not suspect it yet, but that is the case. Now, the thing is, after f4, you lock the position so badly for black that they really can't get out of this easily. Because what can they do? If they ever trade here, it's pretty bad. Your opponent is going to march forward, attack everything, plus after a castle, your rook will be extremely active along the f-file, and it's just basically never a good option for black to trade there. And without this trade, your knight from e5 dominates the position, controlling a bunch of squares around, and for black it's quite hard to find any counterplay. Quite a common blunder here in this position or any other similar position would be to try to move this knight back to d7, trying to tempt you to trade off knights, and if not, black is ready to either play f6 and attack your knight, or maybe f5 and just lock the position so that you don't have the space advantage. And in general, it is a nice idea for black. But the problem is, it usually fails due to the tactical shot bishop takes h7. Kind of like, somewhat resembles the Greek gift sacrifice, not exactly, but anyway, that wins. So that calls the king out, and now we play queen to h5. Notice that, again, as we clear the path by jumping with our knight to e5, now we got this extra resource, queen h5, check to the king. And it became possible due to the fact that the knight moved back from f6 to d7. You see that previously we couldn't do this, because from f6 the knight would simply capture our queen. But because black voluntarily moved this knight back, leaving the king completely undefended. You see that it has no defenders at all. Now we can go hard against the king and try to kill it immediately. After king goes back, now queen takes f7 check, supported by the knight. Black can't take it, and now we attack the king, we attack the rook, so therefore at least we win material and we keep attacking, life's good, you should probably win this. What if your opponent doesn't try to neutralize your knight from e5 and does not play that blunder move knight to d7, but just says, okay, I don't care, let me just develop, and I'm gonna play b6 followed by bishop b7. What do you do then? It's a very interesting question, because that actually will bring us to the middle game of the London system, and therefore you need to know how to develop your attack here. So first thing first, we want to activate our bishop from g3, because currently it looks like a tall pawn, doesn't do anything. After the move f4, we're going to blockade the bishop completely, and you just bring it forward to h4, putting pressure against this knight, and you do want to take it and to split up the pawns, which will expose the king. Therefore, bishop h4 is good from every way possible. And once again, you kind of try to induce that wrong move knight to d7. And it's a very tricky thing actually, because it looks so good and so natural for black to play it for multiple reasons, but quite often it just fails tactically. So as we know, knight d7 looks like a very good idea, playing f6 on the next move maybe, but it still fails due to bishop takes h7, the same sacrifice. Even though right now the position is slightly different, but overall nothing changed too much. Queen h5, still check, king has to go, queen takes f7, king has to go, and now we can take on e8 as we did in the previous line, because black developed the bishop and now the other rook is supporting this rook on e8, therefore we can't take it there. But this time we can grab the knight on d7, as it is undefended, we attack it twice, so we can grab the knight. And as a result of this little tactics, we expose the king, we grab 2 pawns, and we did a lot of devastation here. Plus, knight f6 is coming, quite nice, after like any move of black, you know, something like this, knight f6 is a pretty cool finish. So the pawn is pinned, can't take, therefore it's check to the king by the knight, the king has to go, and now queen h5 is a checkmate. Something like this can easily happen. Alright, now let's assume you're playing against a really strong, well-prepared opponent who's not giving you any chances for a quick win. And now as you played bishop h4, attacking this knight, your opponent correctly plays bishop e7 and just keeps everything super solid. He doesn't drop the knight back, does not allow you to play this bishop h7 combo. What do you do then? Well, after that, you gotta bring more pieces to your attack. One of the easiest prerequisites for a successful attack is simply to outnumber your opponent, right? To have a larger amount of pieces around the king side. And thanks to this pawn on f4, we've got a classical rook lift over there or a queen lift somewhere there. And bringing the queen over is actually better because queen is the strongest piece you have. Also, in 99% of the cases, you checkmate your opponent by a queen, therefore it does make a lot of sense to bring it into your attack. So queen f3, and from there we're going to play either here and target the king, or even more likely queen h3 and try to team up against this pawn on h7. My drunk bishop initially couldn't find the target, so that would be the way. Now, what can black do? I mean, it doesn't really matter really. Let's say they try to block this diagonal, which is a nice option, and you go queen h3, still. And by now, black is already lost. I mean, they don't realize it yet, but it is true. Just because one of the ways to analyze the effectiveness of your attack is to simply see the amount of attackers versus the amount of defenders. If you can outnumber your opponent, it should be easy for you. Now, you've got pretty much all your pieces focused there against the king side. Even this rook is doing a good job because black can't really ever trade there. In this case, a rook will be extremely active over this diagonal, over this file, so that would be really bad for black. So a rook is involved. The knight from d2 is not involved yet, but you can easily move it here and then here. And it's going to attack everything around. It'll be also very annoying. So only the rook on a1 is not included. And yeah, life is unfair. So for the rook, it's pretty sad. But the rest is quite cool. Now, and as for black, he's got basically 2 defenders. And that's it. Which means that white is destined to win here. By the way, if you want to know more about these general principles of attack, which I touched a little bit right now, I've got a free masterclass about that, sharing those general principles, how to develop the right attacking plan in the middle game, regardless of the opening that you play. So if you're interested, I'll drop a link below. And for now, let's continue with our position. Okay, so what can black do? I mean, let's say they still play knight to d7, trying to, trade off some pieces or maybe go f5, something like this, okay? Because at some point they need to do something, right? They can't just sit and wait. You'll bring even more pieces into your attack. And now there are different ways to go about this, but now your concentration of forces is so strong. And again, whenever they bring the knight back, it leaves their king defenseless because it has no defenders. So that always signals you that you may start looking for some tactical shot. And in this case, knight takes f7 is a brutal way to break through. King takes, now we can go f5, and we just want to open this up and go for the checkmate. Disable captures. I mean, we could try to take here and expose, but in this particular case, bishop g3 is quite a nice way to develop the attack. It hits the queen, but it's also a discovered attack of this pawn on h7. So let's say he or she covers the queen. We take over here. That is check. The king has to go. Now we can break open the f file, and that's end of story. So that's how easily you can develop your middle game attack if you know how to bring more and more pieces and all these little different tactical shots that you can employ whenever your opponent is carelessly moving his knight away. And now, what if your opponent doesn't try to do anything about your plans and just says, okay, I don't care, I'm going to develop. I need to develop this bishop. Let me go b6 followed by bishop b7, and I'm playing very classical chess. Nothing bad should happen to me. It's still not the case if you know the right way. As soon as your opponent played b6, this temporarily weakened this diagonal because the pawn is not on b7. And you can take advantage of that by going pawn to e4 right away. Now what it does is, right now we're threatening to push forward with a double attack to his minor pieces. Therefore black will probably take here on e4. Now you recapture. This also attacks this bishop twice. Therefore black will usually take here. Now bishop takes, and notice how we take advantage of this weakness. So we notice this little thing that the pawn is on b6, not on b7, and we make use of that right away. Now the knight is hanging, but your opponent thinks to himself or herself, okay, no problem. I was going to go bishop b7 anyway, and now I'm also covering the knight. But there's a really brilliant, relatively forced sequence of moves that gives you a victory. So first you take on c5, which also hits this bishop twice. Therefore black recaptures, and now you don't trade queens. You don't want to do this, because first of all, to take is a mistake, and secondly, you need your queen for your attack. So you still play queen a4, and you still capitalize on somewhat weakness of this diagonal, and you put pressure against the knight. Now your opponent, let's say, does knight a5 or whatever to defend the knight. Here comes another attacking move, and another purpose of the move queen a4. We actually enabled this square d1 for the rook, and now we can go rook d1 and hit the queen. By the way, it's cool that you can attack with every move that you play. You never let your opponent to, do whatever that they want. They have to constantly just defend against your threats. Now the queen has to go, and there are two very common blunders here. First of all, the queen cannot go here because of our bishop. Okay. What else can he does? He can play queen e7, and that would be really nice, because now rook enters d7 with a double attack to this bishop and the queen, and you win the game. Our bishop is also hidden here. In some lines, actually, b4 is also a threat. So you've got a lot here to offer to your opponent. Let's take it back. Let's say black somehow noticed this thing, and instead of going queen e7, they go queen e8, offering an exchange of queens, which may be nice for black, because if so, they would solve their problems. You would at least stop harassing them all the time. But now, as a ball from the blue, we still employ the same bishop takes h7 tactics. And now it's completely unexpected, because you were supposed to play somewhere on the queen side so far, but now all of a sudden you go after his king, and it works. So after king takes, it's actually very similar to the Greek gift sacrifice, just in a slightly unusual fashion. You bring your queen there to the h-file. Now check to the king as it goes back, knight g5, and this end of story, because queen to h7 checkmate is coming, and there's no good way for black to stop it, so you're gonna win. Let me touch the final two questions that you may have real quick. So how about black trying to do something about this pawn, whether to push or to trade? What are you gonna do then? Going pawn to c4 is a very common beginner error of black. It's a one mover, and as long as you don't blunder the bishop, you're good to go. You just drop it back to c2, and nothing really changes because your bishop operates along the same diagonal as it did from d3, so nothing changes. But now black release the pressure from your center, which makes your life easier. And also in the future, you'll have this additional idea of striking the center yourself with e4. Since your opponent doesn't want to attack there, you can do this. Therefore, c4 is not a problem at all. Basically, it's quite the opposite. You gotta be happy if your opponent plays it. Let's take it back. Now, how about this straight pawn takes d4? It's also quite nice for you, because then you recapture by this pawn from e3. You do not want to usually take this way, because, it enables some annoying knight b4 stuff, and black can use the c-file, so you don't want that. Instead, you recapture by this pawn. And after that, fundamentally nothing changed that much. So let's say black develops somehow, okay? But now, the only thing that changed is that now you've got this semi-open file, which is quite handy. You can put your rook there, it's going to be active here, or you can put your queen there, and it's also active here. Plus, on the next move, you can always bring your knight to e5, and now it's really easy for you to keep it there, because again, you can overprotect it as much as necessary, right? And you still have all the same plans that we talked about before. You can play f4, fixate your knight there, bring the bishop to h4, and develop your queenside attack. Therefore, an exchange on d4 fundamentally doesn't change the situation that much. In fact, it gives you this open e-file, and it rather helps white, while the rest remains to be more or less the same. So it doesn't really affect you that much, and again, you can be pretty happy. Now it's time to turn the table. What if someone plays the London system against you? We know that it can get quite dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So I've recorded this video showing you how to crush the London system when someone uses this against you. Check it out, I'm sure you'll enjoy it.